Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Greg and Joe Turbo Show. As always, I am your host, Joe, joined by the man with many, many hoodies, Mr. Greg Minicello.
Hello.
Greg, hello, sir. Hello, hello.
Hi.
I forget
Yes.
that it's still winter where you live. I'm here in
Yeah.
shorts because I'm sweating in
Well,
Florida.
it's 66 here today, but it'll be 30s tomorrow. So
Oh,
still winter.
beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And joining us from somewhere in the Pacific, I would imagine, uh, we have we have Sailor Jerry. No, we have Sailor Jeremy. I guess that's probably
Yeah.
yeah. Jeremy Hazlett joining, product manager for Turbo, and
Yeah. Yeah. And repeat offender on the podcast.
ooh, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. Welcome back.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here. Now,
Okay.
I was never actually a sailor, but I was in the Department of the Navy. So
Close
one
enough.
of my one of my favorite Uber drivers let me borrow this for the podcast. So
I love that you have a favorite Uber driver.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. I mean,
I like that.
all of my friends, my brethren that are in the United States Navy, the Marine Corps loves you, and we appreciate the ride everywhere we go.
I'm not getting involved in that. So, no, but welcome back, Jeremy. And like Greg said, you've joined us before. It's been a while. So,
Yeah, I
happy
think
to
it was
have
like
you
our
back.
maybe third or fourth one we ever did was Jeremy.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have
I
to
was
go way
on pretty
back.
early on. The weather at your last podcast, I watched. It was 26, Greg. So 66 is a nice jump for you.
Yeah. That also highlights how big the gaps are getting between these episodes, which we don't want to really highlight too much, Jeremy. So, yeah. Ixnay.
I mean, that was only a month ago. That wasn't that bad. Not even. Okay, maybe
But
it was a month.
listen, I mean, you reached out to us. Um, you said you had a burning desire to talk about something in particular.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
on the edge of my seat here.
I am too. We tried to get it out of you a little bit before we hit record here, and you gave us just a ever so slight of a hint as to what you wanted to chat about. So, um, without further ado, maybe let's unveil the secret. What do we chat about
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
gentlemen?
Give it to us.
So, um, the over the past, I would say 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and at least a dozen times, since the beginning of the year, I've had conversations with people that talk to me about Turbonomic, and I really like starting with, "What do you know about it? Please tell me," right? So that I can understand the impression, and usually it's so that I can have a conversation with them about what they actually care about. Um, the past couple of weeks really kind of ramped up this feeling I've had that people think Turbo is just a FinOps tool, right?
Mm.
That the only reason that someone would go and buy Turbo um, is to save money in their cloud. And as someone who did 100% not that as a customer, and came to work here with the goal of helping people that were in environments like mine, I wanted to come on and talk with you guys about, maybe, you guys work with customers a lot, what you hear from them, but really just clear things up and help get the message out that if you think Turbo is just a FinOps tool, um, you've got to think again, right? There's so much more that Turbonomic can do for you, and you can ignore the FinOps angle if it doesn't fit for you, right? That's okay. There are so many different things that Turbonomic can help with. Um, I want to get in here and talk with you guys about it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And step away
I
from
love this topic. This is a
yeah.
great topic. I'm a
Yeah, it's
fan.
funny, and I'll just data doesn't lie, right? So I've got 5 customers right now that I'm involved with, and out of those 5, one of them uses Turbonomic solely for public cloud optimization. So
Like, and also, let's just throw this out there. We are not at all saying that Turbo is not a great FinOps tool,
oh no, right,
because
yeah,
it most certainly is. However, it's not where it started, and it
yep,
certainly isn't where it is today. I mean, it is a FinOps tool and more. But
Absolutely.
I mean, we used to be called VM Turbo, right? I mean, that was the old name, and that kind of should clue you into sort of the roots of the platform itself.
yeah,
But
Yeah, I mean,
I got to agree with you,
we
Jeremy. Let me just say that there's one thing, because I work in the pre-sale side now, and I guess again, I'm happy we're talking about this, because the biggest mistake that I see folks make is positioning Turbo as a cost cutting platform. which it does do. But when you present things that way, you open yourself up to so much competition, right? Everything out there is designed to help you save money. But the question is like, why, like, save money and then like what happens next? You know what I mean? Like what happens when you need something? Like, do you have any means of actually getting that performance back? And the answer is no. So
I mean, it's interesting. We do cover two legs of the three pillars of the FinOps foundation lies out, right? We cover optimize and operate, right? Very well. But you can do those things on-prem, right? And I guess there's another thing that I'll try to remember to weave into this. But that, this idea of optimization, it's continuous, right? It's not a point in time you show up, you fix everything, and then you pull a platform like Turbonomic out. All that does is leave you in the same position you were, 3 years from now, right? And so, it's a continuous effort that can be really daunting, as your environment scales. If you've got, a few hundred, a few thousand VMs, you may have a staff large enough to tackle this. But it gets really difficult to do all of these things and try to balance, the idea of performance with efficiency,
and compliance.
And compliance. I'd love to call out in your own environment, right? It does become a problem that, as we say, is beyond human scale at that point.
Never mind beyond human scale. I think it's fair to say that nobody wants to think about it, especially application developers who want to fix bugs and get features out the door. They don't want to be looking back going, well, how am I sizing this stuff? Did I size it right? Is it still sized right? Do I have to worry about the operations team banging down my door and asking me, why the performance looks like it does? I genuinely believe that application teams don't want to have those conversations, that they don't even want to spend the time thinking about it.
Yeah, especially when you're really close. Like, I mean, Greg, I remember when we worked together, ages ago, on a
6 years now,
that, we would have we would have reviews with application teams from a capacity planning perspective. And we'd have to decide, how big of a server we were going to buy or how large we would scale a server to. And we kind of locked in on that as like, all right, every 3 years, we're just going to jump ahead. But every quarter, we're going to review and see where we're tracking along that estimate that we'd made, starting from whatever point was that we made that initial sizing decision. And, I remember Turbonomic helped us with this, right? We went from well over 100 servers down to 40. And even with those 40, we'd built in overhead because, management didn't believe that we were going to see the results that Turbonomic said we would see. I also remember having 12 boxes of servers sitting on the data center floor for over a year, right?
Yes.
And sometimes you have to do that, right? Your purchasing cycles, whatever, you've got to get those purchases done to keep the financial beast moving. I get it. But it felt really good to get these things right and automate it. We planned it with Turbo, we executed with Turbo, and we just continued operating in that fashion. And the growth was controlled, right? Over the next 3 years, we did grow into those servers. I think we may have played with a few and set up some, test environments.
Like servers, you guys were streaming movies. It's fine. No big deal. That's fine. It was 6 years ago.
Joe.
It's funny, Joe. He talks about playing with those servers in like little test or lab environments. He actually made me zone one of those servers to the storage to see exactly what he had to do on a daily basis.
It's fair.
It's a great lesson.
I like it. Very hands-on. But let me just say this. I agree with you though, because I think the capacity planning piece in particular is something that is often overlooked. And again, folks do care about saving money. Like that, there's just no way around that, right? So our job is really to help frame the conversation around like, why are you not saving that money today? right? Because if you want to save it, you just do it, right? Just
Right.
scale everything down, shut everything off, and like, bing, you're done. Like, there's a reason you're over provisioned today. Why is that, right? And once you can get to the heart of that question, is ultimately, well, I don't have a way to assure performance, so I would rather over provision than suffer an outage, right? Fair. So once you get someone to understand that, you might still run into, I think, some pushback, right? Hey, we already bought these servers, so like whatever. Okay, fair. Maybe that's the case for right now, right? But potentially, to your guys' point, planning for growth, maybe that means you can actually defer new hardware purchases for years out because you actually have enough capacity to support growth over the next 3 years. So then how much does a rack cost you? You know what I mean? Like how what is this? What is the economics there? And those are probably huge numbers. So you can tie dollars to it, right? And if someone really wants to do that, um, you just kind of have to, I think, present it in a way that kind of makes sense for the customer.
Yeah, and I think if you're running this on your own, right, that you've got to play, right? You've got to get curious and try to understand what your environment could look like. I remember going through probably a dozen different server architectures, right, and running these turbo models against it, understanding what it would cost, and finding out what do I actually need to run this. I think at the point we also had like a dozen kind of disparate clusters. We modeled combining those, right? And I think we ended up with 3 clusters in that environment afterwards, right? That really there was no downfall to combining them, and there wasn't a compelling reason otherwise. We just kind of purpose built these clusters as different application teams would say, I've got budget to launch my app. I need capacity, and they would go buy it. And that was great for the introduction of a new app because you really don't know, and the funding is there. But after it's run for a couple of years, especially, you have a really good idea of what stable looks like, and you can assimilate those things into kind of your general population for the rest of your workloads that you're running. Um,
Yeah, I like that idea too of the you get an idea of what good looks like because I think again I think that is like one of the real value drivers of Turbo, and the thing that I kind of probably push the most to prospective customers is this idea of like for so long you've been conditioned to define bad in your environments, right?
Yeah.
Tell me what bad looks like, and then let me know when things have gone haywire. Whereas, and it's subtle, but Turbo kind of switches that paradigm and says, rather than tell me what bad is, your environment. Just tell me what good is, right? Because once I know what good is, now I can give you recommendations to make sure you don't ever fall out of that. Like, why hit a threshold if you don't need to? You know?
Yeah. Well, and it's the idea of turbo. So you said, I mean, saving money is easy, right? Shut it all off, right? And now you've saved money. Don't buy as much hardware. You've now saved money. You've created another problem. Performance is another solved problem. Just over provision. Make everything too big, and you won't run into a performance problem until you start experiencing things like ready queuing your VMware environment or CPU co-stop, those types of issues. But you know, we could argue that performance is a solved problem as well. We bring the intelligence to it so that you're not creating that over provisioning or that waste. But saving money isn't the goal. It's making sure that it's the right size, and we just happen to be identifying the gap between what the right size is and what you've over provisioned. And what we consider the right size already has a buffer built in for those spikes, right, in utilization. And so getting to that point, like the application owner, our friends in DevOps and SREs, they're the persona that I care about the most when developing Turbonomic, right? When working on new features, they are the number one person who's using the platform that I care about, because if the application goes down, I know who the spotlight goes to, right? It goes to them, right? Why did this break? And if they have to say, "Oh, Turbonomic told me to," we've lost that trust entirely. And
Yeah.
it's trust is gained over hours and days and years, and it's lost in one misconfiguration.
Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, I think that's kind of goes back to, I guess, the sort of the methodology that we've all kind of practiced in our time in post sales, right? Is kind of this what we call the journey, right? Sort of crawl, walk, run, which is a very overused phrase, but
everybody understands it. They all know what that means, right?
Yeah,
so that's why it's overused.
But it's true though, right? I mean, because it really is like, you know, in our minds, we want to project often onto customers like this is how you should use Turbo, right? We know because we know it well. Like you're gonna love it, right? But the reality is like no one's gonna flip a switch tomorrow and just automate the house, right? It is going to take a lot of time and a lot of trust, and and a lot of hand holding, which just totally makes sense. But once you kind of get through that point and you get a customer to start automating and seeing the value, there's like that aha moment, right? And absolutely. And I mean, I think, since I've worked at Turbo, I haven't seen really a recommendation mess anything up too badly, So we've done pretty good so far, I think, but they pay me to say that. So
yeah,
you made your money.
I've made mistakes. I've made mistakes, right? Well, I'm also the guy that if you sit in a room, there's one person that'll press the red button. That's me. But I say I've made mistakes because I didn't understand how Turbo worked, right? And this was back in my customer days, that things weren't configured maybe correctly for production, right? That the out-of-the-box settings were a little bit too aggressive, right? Or they simply weren't conservative enough to take into account, my peaks. And I went with it, and I learned. Right now, in the environment where I did some of this learning, it was not, customer facing production. This was internal development services that I was offering, so it was a little bit less damaging.
Yeah,
but
it wasn't as revenue impacting as the production environment was.
I got a talking to. I got a talking to. But
I think the first talking to you got was one of our peers.
Yes, yeah. We spent a lot of time actually understanding the kind of tunables as well within Turbo, and the goal is 100% to make sure that the analysis matches the way your applications work, right? The way your workloads work, and when we get those two married up, and we have the right level of I'll say performance orient, or we can shift weight towards efficiency, right? If it's a dev test environment and really hammer away and enforce some dynamic scaling, it's possible. But it does take a little bit of effort to get this to the point where you're always saying yes and you're comfortable automating, right? Whether that's defining your maintenance windows, defining custom policies for each application, and even just custom observation periods, right? To make sure that, if you're in your busy season, you don't want any actions generated, we'll still be capturing the data, right? We don't want to create noise in your environment. We don't want to be that thing chirping in your ear telling you that everything is wrong when it's really not, right? That's what other observability platforms are made for, right? Your CPU hit 90% for 0.4 seconds, right? Let's move on.
We're good. We're good.
Cool. But tell me when I can do something about it, right? So that's what we're trying to. That's not the misconception I'm trying to drive against. That was completely cloud focused, but it is some education that I think customers, or information, not education, people need, right? That it is so configurable, so customizable.
And if you think about on-prem too, right? I mean, what's like the first action outside of placement, right? I mean, I guess like moving VMs is number one, but number two on that list is scaling up, right?
Yeah.
If you have hot add enabled in your vCenter, like what's the quickest way to get an app owner to trust the ops team? And it's to give them things. Hey, I want to give you resources. Right.
Yeah,
right. And
I dare you to say no.
Yeah, and to your point, right, where there's all of these cost-saving tools that are really just designed to scale in one direction, which is down. That's a much harder pill to swallow as the owner of this application, because like you said, if there's a problem, the spotlight gets shown on you. You are the app owner. I don't care why this happened.
Yeah.
Like, this is your app, your problem, right? And so, like, again, I think, focusing it on the concept of, we're here to drive performance, and then a byproduct of that performance is efficiency, not the other way around.
It's not even a byproduct. It's still performance.
Right.
It's performance at the right size, right?
Right.
You're still assuring that capacity is there. You just don't have all of that wiggle room that isn't even necessary. What you hit into that wiggle room one time in the 4,000 samples that we pulled into Turbo?
Right.
Guess what? You can perform here instead of here.
Well, and it's, if they sold 3/4 gallons of milk, this analogy would make a lot more sense. But if you only go through if you only go through a half a gallon of milk every week, and you buy a gallon every week, Turbo's going to tell you to buy 3/4, right? We're not going to say go down to half a gallon, because you use all of that every week, right? So we want you to have that confidence, that wiggle room, that you can handle that unexpected batch of cookies or cake or whatever.
How does Turbo do that, though, Jeremy? Because you've mentioned a few times this idea of peaks, because I think that is like a real sort of question from customers when we talk about Turbo, is like, hey, but like, I get these times where things are like real spiky,
Yeah. So
what does Turbo, I guess, do different than maybe other platforms, in terms of dealing with those spikes without obviously over provisioning you?
Yeah. So out of the box, we, in the most general sense, we're using percentile math to identify where your workloads are usually running at their hottest, and then sizing towards that, right? That is an input to our sizing algorithm. So, Greg said 4,000, metrics. I think the average monthly is 4,320. Not to be too exact, but
pretty close, Greg. Pretty close.
Not to be too exact.
Yeah, but those are simply the collection points that we're pulling data from things like vCenter, Hyper-V, Nutanix, OpenShift, et cetera. Within those collection periods, we're collecting actually smaller intervals of data. So we've got these data sets, and we sort them effectively highest usage to lowest usage. And if you're using the out-of-the-box 95th percentile, we take the top 5% and we discard them. Those are anomalous pieces of usage. And the very next measurement is the one we start sizing towards. And so if that usage number is 70%, right? If your 95th percentile value is 70%, we're actually not going to change anything, because you've got 30% overhead, which is what, again, our out of the box, or our desired state really wants you to be at, right? Which is you've got capacity to burst, but you are really peaking, in this kind of safe zone that we expect. And so
I'm going to do something that we don't typically do, and I'm going to share my screen while you're doing this, Jeremy, just to give somebody a graph of what is just exactly what you're talking about. I also want to share this link up here. If you guys see this link, come to this article, read this blog post, and we'll maybe we can find some way to get this into the notes for the call. But read this, because this is exactly what Jeremy's explaining. Written by either Chris Graham, or there was somebody else that wrote this. What was his name? Ryan McDonald originally. Anyway, go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry I interrupted you.
No,
just wanted to show that, put that up on the screen. Yeah.
That's perfect, though. So, as you see that P95 line, if that moves up, right, and that moves up towards 75, 80, 85, like, the higher that goes, and the closer to 100 that you get, the larger of a change Turbonomic is going to make on whatever resource we're looking at, right? And so this doesn't tell me if it's CPU or memory. It doesn't matter. We're going to generate actions that will make sure that after you resize, let's say that P95 value was somewhere around 90%. We're going to resize it so that after you make that change, those peaks, that P95 value is going to come back down to 70%, creating that 30% buffer room. Now, inversely, right, if you're very low utilization for your P95 value, we're going to reduce the resources that are allocated to the virtual machine or container or database based on whatever that resource is, to more closely match the usage that we actually see, right? So we want the allocation to equal real usage.
And so, I mean, and this is great. And I think again, I think this is kind of a bit of the secret sauce here of the value of Turbo, right? Is in this kind of analysis. because no, but again, like honestly, look, I mean, talking about this whole conversation began by you saying, people have a hard time selling Turbo the right way, right? And I think this is one of those things that I think is super important, right? Because if you don't really understand it, it's hard to differentiate from a threshold, right?
Yeah.
And that's key. Like getting folks to understand the difference between this and what a threshold is so important, because if you don't do that, then they're always going to look at the platform as kind of same flavor of something we already have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely we'll definitely share that link. What happens, Jeremy, in the case that I have some HA settings I've configured in vCenter. So like these are also real concerns that customers have. So I mean, I know the answer obviously, but for the folks who maybe are unaware, I mean, how does Turbo kind of handle this, or like DRS rules, or things like that?
So a bunch of things here that Turbo does that are kind of, some are unique, some are just working with the existing infrastructure. We import the HA rules for your ESX clusters by default, right? So if you've got N-1 or 2, when we fill out our supply chain and we start looking at the actual available resources for your virtual machines, we take that into account. So the usage across the cluster, that desired state, right, where I usually say 70%, that starts moving down, the higher your HA property is, right? If you're N-4 and you've got an 8-node cluster, we're going to be looking at 50% usage of your hardware.
Right.
But when we get to the applications, we get a lot closer to, the workloads that are running. You've got the ability to create consistency groups, right? To make sure that you've got everything kind of the right size, right? As you've got various tiers of an application. And then you've got the ability to set up a fault tolerance policy, right? To say, well, there's 8 VMs in this group. I can actually handle the failure of 2. Right. I want to be able to shut these nodes down. I've got to be able to do security updates or patch the app or whatever. So they've got to come in and out of service. While that's happening, I don't want my end users or the services that these servers are supporting to be impacted. And so by setting that fault tolerance setting, we start adjusting the available capacity effectively of each node. Right. So if you've got 3 VMs and you set fault tolerance of 1, the effective capacity for any of those nodes is going to be capped at 66% of what it actually has.
And that becomes the new 100% in Turbo's mind, right? Which I think is important.
100% value.
Yeah.
So that, if one node goes down, we know that we have the capacity on those other 2 nodes to take on, the workload that may have been running on, that node you're taking out of service.
I love it. And I mean, again, just to focus on the on-prem stuff. I mean, we're talking about vCenter mostly right now, but that's not all, right?
But it gets worse.
Turbo, I mean, Turbo does have support for other hypervisors as well, right? So it's not just vCenter, although I would say vCenter probably has a pretty fair market share overall. But things like Hyper-V, we support Power, right? Power VM. Anything new coming down the pipe that we should know about?
Soon to support OpenShift virtualization.
That's where I was going.
Yeah. So there is a private preview that's available as well right now. Our containers team really kind of crushed it, and I think Red Hat did as well in rolling out virtual machines as just this different kind of pod that you deploy.
Mm-hmm.
And so management for us from a Turbo perspective, it wasn't very, we obviously understand now that it is a different type of deployment, it's got its own considerations, right, when it comes to scaling and placement. But we've effectively supported it from day one. In sometimes in rudimentary fashions, which we've improved on, and others, like by default, we were able to be the DRS for OpenShift virtualization with no change to a customer's environment whatsoever. Right? We recognize that they were pods, and we dynamically place these things to ensure that your Kubernetes nodes are most effectively used.
We scheduled them, Jeremy. Scheduled.
We do schedule. You know what? I hope that some folks from our containers team, even those that aren't with us anymore, watch this, right? Because they will appreciate
There's a pretty good chance.
Yeah. But changing that scheduling, we do have, a very unique capability. And I'll make a call out to the public cloud only because this can be a lot more interesting for customers running there, where you haven't made that commitment to your infrastructure. You can deschedule or not deschedule, but deprovision nodes, right, from your OpenShift cluster, right? Suspend those nodes. You don't need to be running them. And Turbo's the only platform that's going to reschedule those pods and create that space, right, to actually vacate those nodes so that you can shut it down and scale your cluster back down, right?
And that goes back to
I want to add one tweak to what you said, Jeremy. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, Joe.
No.
Safely reschedule those pods, right, without any interruption. Kubernetes will do that for you. It'll say, let's see, let's line you all up, run out of memory, I'll shoot you, and good luck. Wherever you come back, hopefully there's more memory wherever you need to be rescheduled. Turbo doesn't do it that way.
Otherwise, you'll be in a pending state for the rest of your life.
That's right. Yeah.
Happy trails. Happy trails.
You can have the scenario where, you've spun up a new node and your pod goes over there because there was pressure somewhere in the cluster and there wasn't some place to schedule it. Mm-hmm. And now there is space in the cluster now, and there may have been space there for the last month. But because your pod is running on that one brand new node, it's going to sit there consuming that one brand new node forever.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because there is no mechanism for sort of rescheduling natively. You will have this problem of, this how I explain to people too, is like you could end up in a situation where you have 3 nodes, you have a 4-node cluster, and 3 nodes are at capacity, right? They're like super congested. And then you have 1 node that has like 3 workloads on it. And like the only time that more workloads are going to get scheduled on there is when those congested nodes start kicking things off. And again, it's the same problem. Like I explain this to people that we work with and to customers as well. It's like we have this tendency in my mind to overcomplicate Kubernetes, right? It's the same problem with different names. Like we just call things different names, but the problem is the exact same, right? It's sizing, its placement, and its capacity. And it's how do I manage those 3 things to assure performance? That's it, right? What's the best place to place things? What's the optimal configuration for resources, right? And then again, if possible, maybe I can suspend a node, or maybe I need to provision a node, but I want to make sure that if I do provision that node, I'm going to make use of it. I'm not going to have this situation where I have 3 workloads on it, because that's a waste of money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, you kind of just boil it down. It's not that scary, and I think the value of Turbo, to your point, like extends beyond just the public cloud, beyond just on-prem, but to Kubernetes as well, of all flavors.
Yeah.
So I'll throw out in our testing, right, the rescheduling of a VM in OpenShift is as fast or faster than what we see using a vMotion in VMware.
Prove it right now. Prove right now. Let's go. Let's see it. Greg, get the stopwatch.
We're doing it live.
We're doing it live.
We've done it before.
We're not doing this one live, guys.
All right.
I had one of our engineers, kind of do a side-by-side test and watch, and it ran it 10 or 15 times, no ping drop, no noticeable impact whatsoever, and he was running, kind of a custom built test service in the background to watch it, right? And no impact. So, didn't see any stun. I don't know the magic behind that. but I'm happy to consume it, right? If I, as the end user, never know that something in the background happened,
Yeah.
good, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I just want it to work. As a consumer, I don't. Yeah, I just want it to work. Does it work? Cool. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
And, and
Let me ask you though. So I guess two questions really. The first one is around obviously on-prem. There's this big move to try to reduce VMware licenses just because of cost, of course. But um, uh, OpenShift Vert is kind of gaining a lot of market share, and as we just kind of discussed, that is something that we're going to be supporting. My question is, and I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there any plans for planning, like migration planning, to understand like if you
so
were
happy
to go
to
from
say yes
hypervisor
to
to hypervisor?
you started this question. I was like, oh hell, where's he going? Which is the only four-letter word I'm going to use this
Hey,
podcast.
that's good.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, that's okay. We'll keep that one.
Yeah.
Yes,
I had to cut
absolutely.
the last one out. So
we are working on that. That will be, I believe that's slated for this quarter. Simmer, if
well,
you watch
didn't have
this,
to say that, Jeremy. Now we're going to hold you to that. You could have just said, "Yeah, we're working on it." This quarter,
I'm
you
just,
say.
It's okay. There's a different product manager for that one. We can go talk to them, right?
That's exactly what I'm about to say. Simmer, you go to him. But it'll come punch me in the throat the next time we see each other in person.
Yeah.
So, but I do know that with OpenShift virtualization, we're trying very hard to support customers in understanding their options. Right? We already support migrate to cloud, and you can migrate to any of the major cloud providers. But the idea of migrating between hypervisors is something that, especially when you have these new constraints, right? Like memory sharing, memory overcommit. It's different, if it exists at all in OpenShift, right? And so those are major concerns. The same number of hosts that you have right now that you're running at 200%, over provisioned, you can't do that anymore, right? And so if you were to just lift and shift, you're going to buy double the hardware. That's what's going to happen. So we show up and we right size first. Now maybe it's not double, maybe it's 25% more, 50% more. But you're also moving platforms. You're gaining the all the advantages of the OpenShift platform, and probably saving money while doing that anyways, right? Making that migration away from our good friends at VMware.
What about migrating from the cloud back to on-prem, which sounds like, I mean, I've heard some customers talking about it. I don't know if of any that have maybe actually done it, but it is something that you hear folks, kicking around every once in a while. Is that a possible thing? I mean, again, don't want to put you on the spot, but is that something that like?
No, it is definitely possible, and we've seen some traction coming in. Maybe in the same vein as that blog post, right? Plug the ideas community for IBM ideas. That's where I, as a product manager, get most of my feedback and my opportunity to know, like, you as a customer care about something. IBMers care about everything, right? My customer wants this. My customer wants pink pencils, right? I don't know if I can make that happen, but when we're talking about things that I want to forecast what it would look like for me to move from the public cloud back into on-prem. I've got, I think, 5 or 6 customers that have gone out and added comments or voted on that idea. It's in our backlog. I don't know when it's scheduled for, and I actually can't put the screws to a peer on this one, simply because I truly don't know. But I know that we have it captured, and it is gaining a ton of traction.
Sweet. Looking forward to it. I think that'll be super, super. I love planning. Like in general, I think the planning features in general are super, super useful, and it really, I think customers love when you kind of show these sort of scenarios that you can run. I have one more feature question. That's it, just since I have you. But I know that I know, yeah, this is good. On-prem parking. What is that? Why would I use that? Like, why is this a cool thing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons to do it. I mean, parking.
Well, what is it first? What is it first for those who don't know?
If you let me put four more words out, I would have. So the on-prem parking, shut it off when you're not using it. Now, that doesn't work for everything, right? You're not going to do that in production typically, or at least not for most production workloads. But if you've got teams of, a global distribution of teams, and you're spinning up a VDI machine for, you kind of follow the sun type support or something like that, you can shut stuff off when it's not in use. You've got everybody co-located. Everybody, you keep your systems on from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. You can shut them off because nobody's working on them typically after that. Right now, this all, again, depends on how you as an organization work. But when you can shut those things off, we can shut the VMs off, we can reduce the load in the cluster, we can then start shutting off hosts. And this is the real value that comes in to our customers' environment. By shutting those hosts off, we're it's the dollars and cents of, we're saving money by not powering these things. But there's a sustainability angle as well, right? That you're reducing your carbon emissions by not having that power draw. And we can schedule turning those hosts back on, and using the VMware APIs, right? This is actually a really easy thing for us to do. We simply need your IPMI or ILO or DRAC credentials. Actually, they need to be put into vCenter, not into Turbo. And then we just make the call to vCenter saying suspend this host or power on this host. So we're not injecting anything new other than the intelligence about when to do it and why. So that is coming. The feature itself is in private preview. And in the private preview, there's no UI. It's one of the reasons I hadn't been pushing it very hard, because it can be really daunting to try to go in and create policies and groups and arrange all these things, via API. So I expect to see this have, a UI and go to a maybe more usable preview, hopefully by the end of this quarter. But definitely in Q3, we're going to see, just like you can you've got the UI for parking your Google, Azure, and AWS workloads. There's going to be an on-prem section there where you can start using the exact same, kind of workflow for managing that on-prem stuff.
I love it. That's very exciting. And I think you said something that I think kind of maybe ties all this back to the start of this conversation, which was, we're not introducing anything new, right? The value really is in the intelligent decision, right? Like, you can move things and scale things wherever you are using whatever tool you're currently using, right? But the problem is that the decisions to do that are often hard to get to, right? Or very risky. You don't really know what's the outcome's going to be. And so, again, I think, like, in terms of like how to help people sell Turbo better, I mean, I think that you don't have to be uber technical, right? Again, I think if you focus in on just that one piece, which is, how long does it take you to get to a good decision today, right?
Yeah.
If Turbo could get you to that decision instantly and do that across your environments, would that be something that is valuable? Of course, and then obviously you have to prove it out, because no one believes us right away. It's not too crazy, but no, I mean, I think that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you've got to jump to automation or accepting actions as soon as they're generated, right? If you've got a quarterly capacity review meeting with your team, look at it once a quarter, right? And the real argument or call to action there is look at it, and if you disagree with it, change it, right? Modify the policy, make it fit your application's needs. So that the next time, 3 months down the road, you see that and you go, okay, I understand this now. I agree with it, right? And it's this snowballing kind of impact, right? That when you understand it a little bit, it gets a little bit better. And the more you understand it, the more you can tune things, the more exact it becomes and helpful it is for you, right? There's so many different ways that you can integrate Turbo in your environment, whether it's through action scripts or webhooks, or even just tying into your existing automation platforms, maybe reaching into Turbo and pulling information out that we can help you with. But again, if I understand, if you don't trust the decisions that are being made, that the information is useless, right?
That's one of the biggest things that I love about Turbo is that when we make those decisions, we pop them up, and in the prove it UI that we've got, you'll see in that blog post when you go read it. We give that transparency to say, here's how we came up with this decision. Here's all the reasons. Here's all the data before and after. And oh, by the way, if you don't like it, guess what? You can go change these things and sharpen up that pencil. It's not hidden behind some VM joy measure that nobody knows how they put that together, right? So being able to understand how we're coming to these recommendations, to be able to articulate them very easily, or not have to articulate them, they're just on the screen. You empower those application teams to look at that and say, well, my workload doesn't really work for, like a 95th percentile. We really need to be in like a 99 or even a 99.5 or, something crazy like P100, right? Where you're including and protecting every single peak. Being able to put those decisions into the hand of an application owner to say, if we did this, would that meet the need? And then would you accept this action? It's very powerful.
Yeah, because it's not one size fits all, right?
Right.
I mean, there is an sometimes overwhelming amount of configurations available within Turbo.
Yes.
Every knob and lever you can imagine. You can be as pinpoint precise as you want at a group level, at a global level, at a single entity level, at a single VM. You can have this one VM gets treated different than every other VM in this environment, and that's powerful. To your point, Greg. I mean, I think that is a great way. And again, bringing it back to the start of this conversation, when you're selling Turbo, right? These are the kind of things that I think you should be focusing on, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone just wants to do a good job, I think, and the way I look at it is like technology is designed to make your life easier. And if it's not making your life easier, then it's probably not good tech, right? And so if you're just spinning your wheels and whatever you're using today gives you recommendations and it's kind of a running joke, you're like, we would never take those. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? That's a real problem. That tech is not good tech. It is not making your life better. Right. And so, obviously we're gonna propose that we have the solution to that. And, I think it all starts with kind of framing it that way in the beginning. So
yeah. Hey, if I'm gonna be shameless here. If there are customers watching this, and they've got this desire to go in and make changes, but maybe you're not an administrator, right? You say, I don't know how to do this, or I don't have the permissions to do it. That feature's coming. All right, I'm working through the rest of this year to really kind of revamp the entire permissions model within Turbo and create this kind of self-service UI so that, when you go in there and you see something that you don't like, that instead of having to go bug your Turbo admin or submit a ticket or however your organization handles that kind of feedback loop, that you can just do it yourself. Right. I think that creating the ability to own things on your own is important. We'll be rolling out a feature to provide feedback to actions as well. So maybe you don't want to go in and tweak things because you don't quite understand it. You'll have the chance to check an action and decline it, right? And provide some reasoning why, and get in contact, right? That these things will be aggregated to somebody, within your organization that's running Turbonomic. This is, hey, I reject all of these actions because I don't know how they're generated. Okay. That's absolutely fair. And I would do the same thing. But we've got to have some way of raising your hand and saying help, right? And quantifying how important it is, right? If you've got one action and it's going to save, a gig, or you need to, provision 1 gig of memory, maybe that's going to take a little while to get to you. But if you've got 50 VMs that are, starving for resources, you can highlight all of this and just say, I need this to happen, and fire that information back to your admin.
I like it. That's been a long time coming. So I'm glad to hear that's in development. So awesome. Well, Jeremy, do you feel like you got it off your chest? Is there anything else you want to chat about today?
I did feel better after this conversation. Maybe
That's
it
what we're
was,
here for.
Yeah.
you know, yeah, a little
Don't need
therapy
the couch
session.
or anything.
Yeah. Maybe it was just hearing some kindred spirits, right? That's what I needed.
Right.
I will be following this up with a blog post. I'm probably gonna publish it tomorrow or over the weekend. I'll give you guys the link to that.
Yeah, shoot us that link, and when we post this, we'll put that link as well as the link that Greg brought up earlier in the description of this video. So anyone who's interested, you can just easily find it, click it, and then while you're there, check out all the other stuff that we have. We have lots of cool stuff in the community pages, not just stuff we talked about today. We have public cloud stuff. We have FinOps stuff. I know, again, FinOps is cool. So we got stuff there for you too.
Against it, and you're like, check out our FinOps stuff.
Anyway,
the ABS portal, get that in there as well, right?
Yes.
I really, I appreciate.
I'll pitch that in. Yep.
The engagement with customers there, it really is encouraging. Once we get off here, I can show you guys some stats about those. The ideas portal and what we see. It's actually pretty interesting.
Share it with the world, Jeremy. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Well, we appreciate it, and I agree. Getting together with kindred spirits and chatting about Turbo is always fun. I enjoy doing it. So, thank you for reaching out to us and jumping on today. This is always fun. Greg, anything? Any final nuggets of wisdom before we sign off?
No, just thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure to have a chat with you.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate you making the time, and happy to be back on. Right.
Yeah. Thanks for wearing the hat.
Yeah.
Love the hat.
It's gotta be a good sport, right?
Love the hat.
Yes.
I should come back in a few months and drop an update with our UI and where we're at with some of the other stuff I promised on this podcast.
Listen, you just signed yourself up, so we'll definitely take up on it. So, but no, much appreciated, and again, thank you to everyone who's watching today. As I mentioned, we will put the link to Jeremy's blog post as well as the link to the other blog posts that Greg shared. So please check those out when you have time, and again, check out all the other cool stuff on the community page. But in the meantime, have a great rest of the week, everybody. There for you to each other. And yeah, until the next time. Have a great day, guys.
Alrighty.
Bye, guys.
Later.